Hello everyone, and welcome to my four-part video series on gender and opera. So in this series, I'm going to be discussing how female roles in opera have transformed over the centuries. I'm also going to be sharing my views on how this change has been influenced and has in turn also influenced gender roles in society. And the reason I chose to explore this topic as a video series instead of, say, a podcast or a research paper is because opera is both a visual and auditory art form. So I wanted the medium through which I conveyed my research to also be visual and auditory. So that's how I came to the video series. This series is going to have 4 episodes, including this one. So in this first episode, I'm going to explain why I chose to look at the complicated history of women's role in opera, because it is kind of a niche topic, and I would like to let you know why I chose it. And then I'm also going to give you a short history of opera and provide an introduction to basic opera terminology that is good to know and that will also be very important going forward. Then episode 2 will focus on the strange and tragic story of castrati. So castrati were castrated men who played both male and female roles in early opera, and they're very important to the history of opera, so it's crucial we discuss them. And then episode 3 will discuss the decline of the castrati and the shift to women playing female and sometimes male roles in opera. In episode 4, we'll follow the evolution of the romantic heroine in opera, and I will also share people's views on whether or not opera is inherently a misogynistic art form. And then episode 4 will also discuss current controversies over gender in opera. And I know that a lot of this might not make total sense right now, but it will very quickly, so stick with it and you will see very shortly. Okay, so why I chose this topic, because like I said, it's very niche. So I love singing. I've been singing since I was 8 years old, and I started being classically trained in middle school. Mind you, my 6th grade self was not particularly enthusiastic about opera. I saw it as stuffy and frankly outdated, which I'm sure a lot of people see it as. But over the years, I've really grown to love opera as an art form. So when I learned that my school had the option to do an independent project on the arts, I immediately knew I wanted to do something on opera, but I struggled to find kind of a narrow focus for my topic, because I can't just like broadly talk about everything all encompassing in opera. That would be a very long project. But then one day, my mom sent me an article by Alice Coote titled "My Life as a Man." Full disclosure, I rarely read the articles my parents send me. My dad sends me, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, at least 20 articles a day. But this one was related to opera, and it had an interesting title, so I was intrigued and I clicked the link. So Alice Coote is a mezzo-soprano like me, and she specialized in playing these trouser roles. Before I read this article, I had absolutely no idea what a trouser role was, but I quickly learned that it is a role in which a woman dresses and acts as a man, playing a male character. And in her article, Coote also discussed this idea of gender bending in opera generally, separate from her own career. And while I've been to the opera a few times, and while I've seen operas that had trouser roles in them, like The Marriage of Figaro, I hadn't really given it much thought, and I definitely didn't know that these roles even had a name. So, moreover, like I said, I've been to the opera a few times, and I have never, like gender issues and gender portrayals in opera, frankly, never crossed my mind. So after reading this article, I thought I needed to do some more investigation. This is a whole new topic. So I kind of like went down the rabbit hole and started investigating how women have performed and been portrayed in opera. And for me, this topic was a mother lode of interesting information on the rich history of gender ambiguity, gender discrimination, sexualization of gender, the whole feminist take on gender. There was just so much to unpack. And this curiosity, this kind of passion about a topic was just what I needed for my independent project. So, and also it's not like Western culture wrestled with these ideas about femininity and masculinity during the peak of the Italian Renaissance and then just moved on. Conversations and disagreements about gender are still going on today more than ever. And I think that art is often the best kind of vehicle for these conversations. So I thought that studying gender in opera would enrich my understanding of contemporary gender issues by giving me a historical context for how popular art forms like opera have historically treated performers and have represented things like femininity and masculinity. Okay, so that's why I chose my topic. But now let's very briefly talk about the history of opera and some jargon you need to know to enjoy and understand this podcast. So first off, let me clarify some basic terms. I used the phrase mezzo-soprano earlier when talking about Alice Coote, and that is a reference to a vocal range, so a vocal part. So in opera, the main vocal ranges going from low to high are the bass, baritone, tenor, alto, mezzo, and soprano. The first three, bass, baritone, and tenor, are usually for men, and the last three, alto, mezzo, and soprano, are usually for women. The term mezzo-soprano is a vocal type that rests in between the alto and the soprano. So mezzo is middle in Italian, so you can get how mezzo-soprano, middle, alto, and soprano, you get it, okay. And then an alto, who is also sometimes, you might hear me call them a contralto throughout this podcast. That is the lowest type of female voice. And a soprano is the highest, mezzo is the middle. So alto, mezzo, soprano. If you've never heard these voice types before, I'm going to quickly play some clips so you can hear them and kind of put a sound to the word. So first off, I'm going to play a clip of a soprano singing. And in this video, note kind of the clear, almost bell-like high notes, and they're really sung with a flourish in opera. So the song that I'm going to play, please excuse my German, is Der Holle Rat kocht in meinem Herzen. That is not right. That was my attempt at saying that title. It's commonly abbreviated Der Holle Rat. That can't be right either. And that's an aria sung by the Queen of the Night in the opera The Magic Flute, composed by Mozart. While the name might not ring a bell, not because of my horrible pronunciation, but just because you're not well versed in opera, I am sure this song will ring a bell for you guys. It's iconic, and you've probably heard it before, so here it is. So in the next clip I'm gonna play is gonna be a mezzo-soprano. So listen for the darker, lower sonic quality of the woman's voice, which is typical for mezzo-sopranos. And really quickly, I just wanna say, I said mezzo, and then I'm also throwing around the term mezzo-soprano. So a mezzo, like I said before, is the middle of an alto and a soprano, but typically in opera, the vocal ranges are a contralto, a mezzo-soprano, and a soprano. But in other art forms like musical theater, you'll hear an alto, a mezzo, and a soprano. So they're pretty much interchangeable, but if I'm using different words, that just references specifically the vocal ranges in opera versus, say, a vocal range in musical theater. I hope that made sense. I just didn't want to confuse you guys. So in this clip I'm going to play, this mezzo-soprano is Cecilia Bartoli, and she is singing the song Voi che sapete, which is a trouser roll aria, also written by Mozart. So here that is. Here is that. Okay, and then the last and lowest vocal range is the contralto or alto. And in this clip, listen for the deep and powerful, full-bodied quality of an alto. And when I'm saying aria, that is a term in opera which means a solo song. So again, those are interchangeable, solo song, aria. Anyways, here's the clip of the alto singing. Okay, now on to male vocal types. A tenor is the highest male voice type, and the bass is the lowest. And in between these two lies the baritone. For the purpose of this video series, you should know one more vocal type, a male vocal type, and that is the countertenor. Countertenors are not common really in anything except opera, I would say. When a man sings in falsetto, sings in that higher, airier range, a man who really only sings in that vocal range is a countertenor. And it's a specialized male voice that sits right above the tenor. Here's another tenor, Juan Diego Flores, performing Por Maname, and you will be able to hear the high Cs. It's incredible the control he has over his voice. So one of the reasons singing these high Cs is so impressive is because for a man, belting out these high notes can actually destroy the tenor's voice because of extreme force, the extreme force of the vocal folds hitting together. It can actually cause bleeding called a vocal hemorrhage, which then leads to scarring. So you have to be very, very technically trained to sing these notes. And beautiful singing in general requires flexible vocal folds. So it's important that these singers are very well trained. Just to kind of tie it back to singers you might know, Adele and Idina Menzel, both very famous singers. Idina Menzel, if you don't know, she sang Defying Gravity in Wicked and Let It Go in Frozen. I'm sure everyone else knows Adele. But a lot of the songs that these two singers sing require high belts, and both of them have had vocal issues because of scarring on their vocal cords. So anyways, back to the countertenor. I'm getting a little sidetracked. A countertenor can reach these really high notes by singing in falsetto, which I referenced before. And that is where the singer places his vocal cords in a specific way which lets air pass through only the thinner outer edges of the folds, and this produces a high, airy, kind of ethereal sound. So it's a very distinctive sound. Okay, so now that we have some basic terminology out of the way, I hope I didn't lose any of you. Let's talk about what makes an opera an opera. There are lots of, say, musical theater shows that have songs that sound very similar to the clips I just played for you. So should those be considered an opera? Well, no. I'm going to give you some characteristics that are specific to opera so that you can have a kind of easier time identifying what makes an opera. So traditionally, all of the opera is sung. There are no spoken lines, and the closest thing to a dialogue in opera is called the recitative. And this is a portion of opera where people are singing in the rhythm and speed of speech, so it feels like they're talking, but they're still singing. It's kind of a weird concept, so again, I'll play you a clip. So here's an example.
Andiamo a mendicar la morte altrove. Padre, fermo! Si fiacca staria dunque, che di grida impotenti il suon ti scuote. E mio padre che parla! Io son tuo sposo. Non peranco, e di qua scender posseo, e non del padre che il sentiero incontri.
So if you can note, it doesn't sound like a song. There's no melody line or anything like that. It's just kind of like chords being played underneath people singing notes. So it sounds like talking, but it's singing. That's a recitative. And this makes opera different from musical theater. And the reason for the all singing format was that early opera composers felt that music conveyed emotions better than anything, and that talking would take away or deduct from the composers trying to convey this emotion. And this brings us to the second defining feature of opera, emotion. Operas are highly dramatic with extravagant displays of emotion. The word melodramatic is a good description. That's why soap operas are called soap operas. They're so melodramatic. And then third is that opera performances are not mic'd. So, and when I say mic'd, like they don't have a mic attached somewhere on their body that is technically amplifying their singing. And they're expected to project and be heard over the orchestra without any technical amplification, which is quite a remarkable and difficult vocal feat. And opera houses are of course constructed with optimal acoustics so that the singer's voice is amplified, but still opera singers need to have extreme vocal power that far exceeds the power required in any other musical form like musical theater or something like that. And then fourth, in addition to power, an opera singer must have a pretty extensive range. Opera singers are expected to be able to sing at least two octave range, but some are even able to sing across 4 octaves. So that's impressive. And then the fifth thing that makes opera different is that it's always sung in the language that it was written in, which is usually Italian, French, or German. So you're rarely going to hear an opera sung in English because there was really few notable English composers. And not that you're going to the opera anytime soon, what with these, the pandemic. But this might set you off from going to an opera because you're thinking, oh my God, they're singing in French, Italian, and German. I'm not going to understand a single thing of what they're saying. But do not fret. Most operas almost always have English subtitles projected at the top, which is really nice for those of us who are not fluent in other languages. And then finally, opera is distinct because of its opulent costumes and sets, complex staging, stories, and musical composition. That one's a little more general, but opera has a very specific aesthetic, and it's pretty identifiable. And I'm sure you saw that in the clips of the singers I played. But hopefully these kind of typical characteristics of opera can help you identify an opera. Okay, so moving on to the history of opera. What's generally considered to be the first opera was composed by Jacopo Peri, again, probably saying that wrong, titled La Daphne, which was written in 1597. La Daphne was a favola and musica, which means a fable set to music. And then from this first opera emerged 2 types of opera. The first type was the opera seria. That was the dignified and serious and more formal type of opera. And this style of opera was made for the royalty who attended the operas and sponsored the composers. Of course, the composers want to, compose operas that will get sponsored by these people. So that was opera seria. And then there was opera buffa, which were comedic operas usually. Opera buffa was the democratic art form of opera. It was for the masses, and it was usually created for an audience made up of regular men and women. So the two types, opera seria, more for the royalty, nobility, and then opera buffa, which was for the common person. And year-wise, around 1600, the Baroque era in opera began. But opera's heyday was from 1650 until 1750, kind of generally. And Baroque operas were spectacular. The stages, the costume, the set, every aspect of the opera was a work of art within itself. The arias, which were the solo songs, became more and more embellished and elaborate. And this elaborate style of singing was the beginning of the bel canto style, which directly translates to beautiful singing. I'm just really quickly going to explain bel canto singing because it's very important to know, and I'm going to be talking about it a lot throughout this project or throughout this series. So one of the core elements of bel canto singing is this register-free singing. You might have heard the terms chest voice and head voice. This refers to your lower and upper vocal register. Register meaning like the notes, the placement. So like when someone is singing very high, it's in their head voice, and when someone is singing low, like it's usually their chest voice. And so in bel canto singing, you are supposed to have one register, so it shouldn't be split up into chest and head. The singers who were singing the bel canto style were expected to have like a seamless connection between their two registers, and this requires extreme vocal control. If you want to pause this video and kind of just do like a siren, like a and try and start at your head voice and go down to your chest voice, you will probably crack. Or it's very difficult to jump back and forth between these registers and not sound like they're disjointed or disconnected. So here's a clip of, I talked about him earlier, Luciano Pavarotti, and Marilyn Horne discussing the seamless register in bel canto singing. Marilyn Horne is an American mezzo-soprano, and she's won 4 Grammy Awards, so she is qualified to speak on this. So let me play the video now.
I have a scale that I learned many years ago from my main teacher, which is very good for mezzos or contraltos, which takes you down into your lower register and then brings you back up without bringing up all that weight from the low register. And that is just singing like this.
It's control.
Right, but you can crescendo into that lower register for the effect, but you don't bring up that dangerous weight of the chest.
Without make any break at interruption.
Another characteristic of bel canto singing is messa di voce. So messa di voce is a singing technique where you sustain a single pitch, or like you stay on one note, and you can gradually make your voice louder and then softer. This may sound super easy, but messa di voce is actually a very advanced skill for singers to have. Again, I'm going to play a clip of Marilyn Horne and Australian dramatic soprano Joan Sutherland practicing their messa di voce, so you can hear it in practice.
Messa di voce? No? Sì o no?
Sure, sure.
And then finally, coloratura is another feature of bel canto singing. So a coloratura is an elaborate ornamentation of a vocal melody. So kind of to put it in simple terms, it's just you're singing really high and jumping between a bunch of notes very quickly. And in operatic singing, it's usually someone singing coloratura is usually a soprano. I'm going to play two coloratura clips. The first is Luciana Serra, who is an Italian soprano, and the second is, again, Joan Sutherland, who you saw in the previous clip. From these clips, bel canto is a lighter, more florid singing style, which requires extreme vocal flexibility. So I'm going to be referencing this specific bel canto style of singing quite a bit, so hopefully this has given you some understanding of it. Okay, so it was during this Baroque era, bel canto style time, that castrati were introduced to opera, which is going to be the topic of my next episode, and I'll just say now, it's a demented story, but you're going to have to wait until next episode to hear about it. Just like politics would swing back and forth between liberal and conservative policies, opera swung between being a more formal, realistic style to a highly emotional, ornamental, and occasionally fantastical style. So after the Baroque era, which aired on the fantastical, emotional, ornamental side, opera moved into the classical period during the Age of Enlightenment, and the classical period was from 1750 to the beginning of the 1800s. And just as philosophy and science during this period focused on reason, art, including opera too, became more realistic with believable storylines, less florid ornamentation of the arias. So it was becoming more realistic. And then after this classical period, I'm jumping ahead to the 19th century, this was the Romantic period, and that dominated the 19th century. During the Romantic period, again, we return to these dramatic, grand operas with a clear emphasis on emotionality. You can look at Romantic art in paintings too, and you'll see that there is this dramatic, brooding, emotional style that was popular at that time. And this period, though, the Romantic period, kind of brought an end to the Italian bel canto style of singing. So that's important to know. And I just want to say, I know that opera now seems like something old, uppity people attend. Like they go and they sit in perfect silence and they shush you if you interrupt their singer or if you crack open your bag of M&Ms. But back then, opera was the main form of entertainment during the 1600s, even more so during the 17 and 1800s. And it was frankly a party. It wasn't just sitting in silence staring at the singer. No, it wasn't that at all. People really showed up for opera in their best attire. They ate, they drank, and they even socialized throughout the whole thing. In fact, it was actually common that they were only quiet when a celebrated singer was singing a celebrated aria. This was more for opera buffa. In opera seria, they were a little bit more respectful. The nobility had a lot more social mores they had to follow. But in opera buffa, it was a party. It was like going to a nightclub with live performers almost. Okay, that's just something to note. And for the purpose of this project, I'm mainly going to be focusing on Europe in the 16th and 18th century. Keep in mind, though, that just because I'm doing this very narrow focus on Europe in the 16th and 18th century, it doesn't mean that opera was not thriving in other parts of the world. Just, to show you, I'm going to play a clip of Chinese opera, which is very different from Italian opera or European opera generally, but it is just as complex and it requires extreme vocal skill as well. Stylistically different, but still you need to be a very skillful singer. So that was a really brief history. I hope I've introduced myself to you and my topic, and I hope that you'll tune in next time when we talk about the castrati. I can assure you, you will be both intrigued and horrified at the same time by their bizarre story. And this episode was different than the next 3 episodes are going to be. There wasn't really any analysis, and we didn't really dive into my topic, so I'm sure it wasn't as interesting. But hopefully you'll come back for episode 2 because there is a lot to talk about. So thank you, and I will see you then.